Hello and welcome. It's podcast time again, and it's the Scotland Rugby News podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg Shaped, and my guest, the one and the only, Mr. Gavin Harper. Hello, Gavin. How are you?
Very well, Mr. Bruce. How are you?
Yeah, good. It feels like a long time since I've seen you. So we can't be all night, right? We can't be all night because I've not had my tea and I'm fading away here.
Neither have I, and I'm similarly famished.
Before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor. The Scotland Rugby News pod is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV now. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. So, Gav, people that don't need S1 Jobs, there's a few people got some new gigs. John Dalziel, British Lions coach. I don't think any of us saw that coming.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card even 24 hours, 48 hours ago. Look, great for John, great experience. Class for, I think, Scotland to have somebody in those discussions. Clearly, 4 years ago, having Gregor and Steve Tandy involved, would have been an influence one way or another in getting the 8 players that ended up going on the tour to South Africa. So, yes, John maybe doesn't have the clout of a Gregor or a Steve Tandy. He's not been an international head coach. He's not been a pro team head coach. But, when you look at all his experience, he's clearly been about the game for a long time. And I think if we're led to believe that Paul O'Connell said no in favour of taking the Ireland job, then maybe John's the logical choice.
Do you know, there's a few things. One, another Gala Academy man making a mark on World Rugby to add to the ever-growing list. But, I've bumped my gums about this before, and I've said this to you. My worry is the next Scotland coach won't be Scottish, and maybe for the next 2, whereas JD adding this to his CV maybe bumps him up the queue a little bit. And, we've seen little swaps when people have come out of the national job. So if Franco was to become Scotland coach, is the step rather than JD stay as a link to that? Does he then become Glasgow head coach, which would kind of seem logical in the thought that maybe JD is the next Scotland coach. So I'm really chuffed in lots of ways. I've known John for a long time. He's come through club game. He took a gamble really to become a professional coach. It's paid off. He's worked his tail off. I know people that speak really highly of him. Bill Noble told me years ago how good a coach John Dalziel was. So he'll be absolutely delighted. He's been a mentor to JD for a long, long time. But I think it's great for John. I think it's great for Scottish rugby. And I don't just mean getting bums on seats on the plane. Longer term, it's class for Scottish rugby.
Yeah, no, look, I totally agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think we maybe on the outside have this perception that like John Dalziel, Pete Horn are Scottish rugby kind of through and through, if you like. I think an appointment like this, in whatever circumstance, whether or not Paul O'Connell has turned the Lions down, it shows how highly regarded somebody like John Dalziel is in the kind of wider sphere. So I think it's recognition that clearly he is a good coach. He's put a lot, as you say, he's put a lot of hard yards in and done a lot of, yes, he got to travel the world with the Sevens team, but, he's done a lot of hard graft to get to the national team. He maybe isn't just an SRU, here's your playbook, son, and go and play. And now he gets a chance to go and work with the best players in the home nations. And you would like to think that you'll learn plenty of
massively
being on that tour. And then when if Gregor remains in post, which given the silence seems like the most likely thing, I would think now. I say that and guaranteed 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll get the news otherwise, but you then have got 3 coaches out of 5 who've been involved as coaches as with that Lions setup. I think somebody like Peter de Villiers has obviously great experience as a player, but I find it difficult to equate playing experiences and then what people go on and do is coach it, because they are so different.
I think it's better that John Dalziel goes than Gregor going.
Yeah, I mean,
for Scottish rugby, it's better because
I probably agree with that.
When Gregor is finished as Scotland coach, whenever that is, and I think it will be after the World Cup. So when Gregor, if he remained in Scottish rugby, it would be to take over from David Nucifora. It would be to become performance. I'm not sure that would make sense for Gregor as an individual. I think
I get you.
Being the national coach for the length of time that he would have been by then, he would probably go and play some golf somewhere, go and be a consultant, do some nice things elsewhere. For DL to go makes more sense in that professional development for John. Tandy, depending on who you speak to, is going to get a bigger gig somewhere else, maybe won't hang around until you're waiting for Gregor to step down unless you get some kind of guarantee, and I don't think guarantees really count for a huge amount this far out. So I think for Scottish rugby, it's a brilliant thing. Tandy is more likely to go elsewhere than DL because DL's Scottish. This is home. Tandy might well disappear. I think it's class, and players very seldom tell you otherwise. But I do know of a few players that have worked with John who will openly say how good a guy he is. They rate him. Yeah. His coaching's good. Makes sense. They rate him as a human. Tell you what, his boy's going to be a hell of a player as well, Jake. Yeah. What a rugby player that kid is.
Yeah, I mean, having watched Jake probably once or twice, I thought, hang on a minute, let's let this. And then somebody said, by the way, that's John Dalziel's son, and you think, well, some of it you can tell, but other bits of it, like he looks a real.
Yeah, he's a bairn. He was playing under 18 rugby when he could have still been under 16. I mean, the kid is. Anyway, that's an aside, and he'll be absolutely delighted that his old man's going to bring back a whole load of stash. Because let's face it, that's what's most important when you're 16 years old. But I think it's class, and it says a lot. I've seen Gala and Melrose claiming him on social media today, which did make me chuckle. But both clubs contributed massively to what he did, and Melrose from a coaching point, and Gala for making him fall in love with the game when he was a bit of daft laddie. So I think it's brilliant. I'm really, really chuffed for him, the town, the clubs, Scottish rugby, the players, and I think I saw somewhere they've already spoken about 75 players. And I take a lot of that with a pinch of salt. But I think picking a squad at the moment, I think we could probably pick 20. But after that, I think you're then getting into who can shout the loudest and make the biggest case. And I thought I would love to sit in on that meeting. I wouldn't be able to shut up, let's face it, but I would love to sit in on that meeting and hear what's discussed and how you make a decision between this internationally class player and this international class player.
I think we've all watched the DVDs or the documentaries of behind the scenes, and I never get the impression that they go into those selection meetings with them being the idea of them being short meetings. If they added you in, they'd be. I mean, they might as well.
We'd be late for the first test.
Incredible.
But you know the thing that Netflix documentary that we've both blasted, and I was chatting to Duan about it last night. It felt false when Steve Borthwick's going, right, what have we got? And they all open their laptops and go, oh, well. But Steve Borthwick loves his data, crunches a lot of numbers, how far you kick, and and a lot of it's rugby by numbers. Farrell, and I don't know him at all, but when you've seen him in action, he plays a lot on emotion. And I think he's going to pick pretty much the hardest players, and that's where when you come for a toss-up between Keenan and Kinghorn, I wonder what is the deciding factor for somebody like Andy Farrell as the head coach that might be different from a Gregor Townsend as a head coach?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think, and that's where I think if you had no influence, if you didn't have a Scot there at all to say, well, actually, you might not see that Blair Kinghorn is a guy for when the chips are down, but I am going to tell you that he is, or I'm going to tell you that Hugh Jones needs to be at 13, not Gary Ringrose. Like, yes, John's area of expertise is the forwards. I've written a piece that's just gone online about the chances of the forwards and how they've been impacted by John's appointment. But like right across the board, it's just a bit of a bonus to have somebody in those conversations, because you're right. When in any walk of life and in any situation, when you're not sure, the easy decision is to deviate to what you know. And it would be easy for Andy Farrell to say, well, we'll just pick Hugo Keenan and we'll pick Gary Ringrose because these are the guys I'm going to go back to coaching. But it might not necessarily be the right thing.
But I think, like, back to the emotion point, like James Lowe, Duan van der Merwe, two different beasts. Both British Lions, like absolutely no question. But when it comes to decision time, one or the other for a Lions test, those are the conversations I would love to hear. And I think Andy Farrell will listen to what everybody's got to say, but he's picking the team he wants to pick. It'll be Andy Farrell's 15. There's a selection committee but it's Andy Farrell's 15. And that's where I'm not sure off the back of our Six Nations. What I hope is Glasgow and Edinburgh can turn something in towards the end of this season, because I think there's a few boys that are a bit twitchy. If Blair was still at Edinburgh compared to where he is, there's so much in it. I mean, the Lions we'll talk about a lot more, but ultimately DL, I think we're probably as pleased for DL as we are going to be for any player. Yeah,
and I think that's fair. And actually, when you watch the press conference from London this morning, and I think it was Alex Payne, the presenter, said to Richard Wigglesworth, like, you look like a kid on Christmas Day. And he totally did. Like, he looked as pleased as any player you see jumping about
they wonder the way England have attacked in the Six Nations.
Well, I mean, that certainly was a bit of a surprise. But for any of them, and I think Simon Easterby is the only one who's got Lions experience as a player. Farrell obviously has been there before as an assistant coach, but like for the others, there's no way that John Fogarty or DL or Andrew Goodman, when they started coaching, thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be involved with the British Lions.
But these guys, like the motivation for the likes of Wigglesworth, you look at what could be a Lions squad. I'm going to be able to pick Jameson Gibson Park. Like, I'm going to be able to work with Finn Russell. I'm, Hugh Jones. I'm like especially for likes of, DL line out time. I would love to know how much the players give for something that's so technical and prescribed. When it comes to attack, there's so many line out coaches and forwards are going to go, oh, what do you know? And I totally agree. I know hee-haw. But in a line out where you're able to rehearse and practice and analyse and come to in attack, once you get beyond that first bit, you've then got to have some kind of principle that we play to, and hopefully it's the right thing. And I just think I would love to know, DL's about to sit down and he's not got the Jim Telfer. People are not sitting down in awe of Jim Telfer. Like, some guys will be going, like, they'll be on the WhatsApp to their Scottish mates going, right, what's this guy DL like?
Yeah.
you know, I know the Scottish boys will have been all over him, like, "Oh, well done, John! I'm so pleased for you." They'll be creeping all over him. But I would love to know forwards coming to him and going, "I think we should do this. I think this is how Australia will go. I think this is how." Like, it's a really interesting thing. Jeez, I wish I was there.
Don't we all? Like that, being able to put a marker on. This is how I'm going to shape the Lions set piece. This is how ultimately that will form a large part of the, like, I'm sure we'll get on to chatting about Edinburgh, but chatting to Sean Everett this week basically said, the reason they got beat against Benetton at the weekend was their line out. And it shows how important, integral a part of the game it is that he's now got the opportunity to work with Tadhg, Maro Itoje, Daffyd Jenkins, whoever else, Joe McCarthy, that these guys will all probably, you're right, be saying, "Hey, who's this? Who's the Scotland forwards coach?" Considering how Scotland played in some facets, and you think about Scotland's scrum against England, they might be saying, "Well, wait a minute, what's this guy know?" So it's a really interesting dynamic. I think it's fascinating, but before we kind of get stuck talking about the Lions all night, I think that it's great for John Dalziel, and it's great for, as you said, it's great for Scottish rugby.
Yeah, class. Ben Vellacott, Pierre, Gilco all got new deals at Edinburgh. Gregor Brown at Glasgow. Nobody needing S1 jobs, unfortunately.
No, but I think the fact that Glasgow are losing Henkel Venter is a blow. I think he got a bit of stick when he came over and has proven himself to be one of those guys who just is 8 out of 10 every time he plays. I think the challenge for somebody like a Gregor Brown is to almost go and fill that space and become that 8 out of 10 every time he plays. I thought he made a big impact off the bench against Munster. The Edinburgh ones, Gilco is Mr. Reliable, Mr. Edinburgh. Like, I was actually looking the other day at his career appearances, and he's obviously got 80 caps for Scotland, 15 games for Edinburgh. And I thought, he must be getting close to the number of games Chunk played in his career. And then looked at that, and Chunk's on 268 games for Edinburgh and like nearly 70 caps for Scotland. And I was like, that's virtually untouchable. Like, I don't know of it. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who would play so regularly for their club that they would get to nearly 300 appearances, but also play almost every single week for the national team. It's just bizarre. But no, good for Gilco. Spoke to him the start of the week, and he was saying he thinks Edinburgh are getting closer to a trophy, perhaps. Not sure I agree, but well, yes, he said the proof of the pudding's in a couple of months' time. The Ben Vellacott one, I think, is interesting. Clearly, there has been much talk about Ali Price potentially to France. Nothing's ever been officially announced, but that certainly would indicate that might happen. And then it might be Ben and others to kind of step up, because he's not really had much luck this season. He's been a lot of coming off the bench, and I'm not sure at 30 that's probably the position he wants to be in.
Yeah, he's happy in Edinburgh. His family's started. I think this feels like home. So, and I hope it goes well for Gregor Brown. I think that's I'm not sure I ever thought he was going anywhere else at this stage in his career, but I think it's a good thing, and we want him to now kick on, because that his competition for a Scotland jersey are getting a bit older, and we need him to come in and say, right, now it's my time, step aside. Great to see Kyle Steyn back. Looked like he'd never been away. I mean, he's obviously got a formal leadership role, but the boys just love him. The boys speak so highly of him. He's done so well. And speaking of consistent, he he has a base level of consistency, but he also has some standout moments where he just, I actually think he's better than although a lot of us rate him highly. I still actually think it's where the local bias that I always give us all stick for. I don't think we champion Kyle Steyn as much as we should because we've got Darcy and Duhan, but actually I think Kyle Steyn's right up there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if Kyle Steyn was an English player playing in the English Premiership, he would be a rock star because I think he could be in the position that Tommy Freeman is now in, and people are saying, you know what, this guy could end up on the Lions.
I totally agree. I think Kyle Steyn, Darcy, and Duhan, I could take all of them on the Lions tour without being ridiculous, but it's difficult to justify that on Scotland's performances and the amount that they're able to show at international rugby. But I think you hang on. I think Kyle Steyn could play for England. Darcy and Duhan could undoubtedly play for England, but we've now got Freeman as potentially player of the tournament, and you're like, what? Like that's bonkers.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally agree, and I think if Kyle Steyn is going to sort of not have a chance at that, but I think what would do him a lot of good is that Glasgow go far into Europe.
Yeah.
He keeps playing the way he's playing. They go far into the URC because actually I still think, and I think probably more so now after the Six Nations, that there is this, oh, well, it was a one-off from Glasgow. And I think they probably need, maybe looking a wee bit far ahead here, but they probably need a big win against Leicester that makes people say, oh, well, hang on a minute, this Glasgow team are a serious team. Because you're right, I think somebody like a Tommy Freeman's come from nowhere. All of a sudden, potentially Six Nations player of the championship. But I think on his day, Kyle Steyn
which is mental. Like that rise for Tommy Freeman is bonkers. But it shows what a positive Six Nations can do, because nobody in England was talking about Tommy Freeman being player of the tournament. Never mind being a British Lion, and I mean that's the sign of what it could have done. It's a bullseye. Look what you could have won. If we'd beaten England and all of a sudden we're the ones finishing second, all these boys are now in the frame. Anyway, and then Horny, 54 tries for Glasgow. I mean,
how good would it have been if he'd broken that record with DTH, and the DTH would have been dusting his boots off for one more game.
The Warriors there for their 10-year anniversary, and somebody rips your try scoring record away from you underneath your nose.
Thanks for the invite, lads.
Yeah. I mean, the banter for that would have been brutal if that had happened when he was
horrendous. There. But how good was it seeing all the 2015? Some of them looked like they could still do a turn.
Aye, but that's one of those annoying things when they stop being professional athletes and they find Lycra and High Rocks and CrossFit and all that kind of party. Like you're supposed to get fat. You're supposed to go to dinners all the time and have hospitality, not get actually fitter and slimmer. Yeah. It just makes me sick. I always think it's funny when you see pundits on the TV. It's probably more in football, and you get the ones that like Alan Shearer that still looks fit as a butcher's dog, and then you got what John Barnes was like when he retired and he just got bigger and bigger. It's like, right, you've got the hospitality bug. You've got the health and fitness bug on your own terms. Anyway, great win for Glasgow off the back of Six Nations. Kind of a funny selection for both teams with who was available and who was allowed to go on holiday and how you prioritise. Right, we're giving you this one off because we want you back for this. I think Sarries had all their boys back, and Finn was obviously back and looked like he was having fun. And just, I found that, Xander's been away getting some sunshine, Duhan and Pierre been away getting some sunshine, but Matt Fagerson was I found it an interesting mixture. It didn't work for Edinburgh. It seemed to work for Glasgow, as we keep saying.
But I think that's it. That's the two results are the complete epitome of the two clubs. Like Edinburgh weren't spectacular to watch. How often, without Darcy and Doohan, did I come on here and say, "Oh, Edinburgh were brilliant to watch. Edinburgh chucked it about, and they were, skinning players left and right." Very rarely. They rely so heavily on those two and Westhuizen to make stuff happen. Without them, I thought they did all right. They controlled most of the game. The halfbacks kicked in terrible weather, all right. And then it's like, Musese has clatters somebody in the head, and before you know it, the game gets away from them. And it just felt so Edinburgh. It felt like, oh, here we go again. And then once they were behind, I just thought, there's no coming back from this. Whereas Glasgow were in a bit of a sort of dogfight, but I never thought Glasgow were going to lose this because their home record's so good. And I actually thought Franco, when he needed to, made some subs, added some impact, and they sort of wrestled the game back from Munster. I just, like, we can't say it enough, but Edinburgh are so frustrating to watch. Now they'll bounce back. They've got Dragons at the Hive on Friday. They'll win that. Like, if they don't, that's a catastrophe, like a complete disaster. Dragons are bottom of the league. But then Edinburgh have got the Lions the following week in the Challenge Cup. Fair enough, it's at home again. I expect they'll have all the big guns rolled out.
I would expect to see Darcy, Doohan, Pierre back for Dragons.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And do you know what I'm really interested to see with players back, who they pick in the centre?
Yes, well, I think they're obviously going to be without Musese. So, like, get Matt Curry off the wing. Like, I know he's got a hat-trick on the wing against Munster, but, like, the guy's a 13 and he needs to play 13 as often as possible.
So does Langer go to 12?
Yeah, I think James Lang goes to 12. And by the way, I think I said this a few weeks ago, Edinburgh look a much better team when James Lang plays 12 than when he doesn't. I think that it's not like Musese's hardly played in Super Rugby. I think too much is being asked of him on too regular a basis. I think they've got to just, he'll now get probably a few weeks out the firing line. But like James Lang, Matt Curry's a solid centre partnership. So stick with that.
I'm also interested to see what they do in the back row. I think Hamish plays. It seems like he's now back.
Yep.
Maggie, Ben Muncaster, like that back row that played last week is a very good back row.
Yeah, it is. I think I can probably safely say I'm not sure Ben Muncaster will be available this weekend. I think he got
okay. So Jamie, and that probably works that Jamie comes in, and Freddie Douglas is still there, and staking a claim now genuinely rather than feeling a bit forced maybe at the start of the year.
Yeah.
Pierre comes in. I think Paul Hill can just keep going. Ashy at hooker, which means the bench probably stays the same with Bohan dropping out to come on. But Bohan's done well.
Yeah, but Bohan's done really well. And actually, I think if we're looking a bit longer term, Bohan's somebody who will be a big asset, I think, to Scotland when he qualifies for the Six Nations. I think Rory Sutherland and Jamie Batty are good players. Clearly, Rory Sutherland's a Lion. But I think the level that Bohan Venter gives you every week is possibly as good as Suz. look, I think it's more competition, and he's a destructive scrummager. Just to pick up on your point, I think the plan, as I gather from Edinburgh, is that Dave Cherry won't, Ewan Ashman won't play this weekend.
Okay, so he's getting his holiday this week.
So he gets his holiday, and so does Sam Skinner. But they offset that with Dave Cherry's back and Gilchrist's back as well. So there'll be a few changes, but I think it all looks like they're both going to go fully loaded into their round of 16 games, which is exactly what you would expect.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think, we've been, it feels like Groundhog Day. We're saying very similar things about the two clubs, with the hope that this weekend is going to be a good one, and hopefully it is. Glasgow at home to the Lions, Edinburgh at home to the Dragons, 2 home games. Time to start getting excited. Knockout rugby coming, a bit of a different picture. The URC, it's a good league. The standard is good, but a lot of the games, they're difficult to really get that excited about.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a chance to try and get some consistency and build towards something that is a bit more exciting. Now, I'm not convinced we're going to be talking about Lions and Leicester in years to come as great games and big games that we got particularly excited about, but they're certainly more exciting that there's some jeopardy in it. And, I really hope in a couple of weeks' time we're talking positively about what happens next for both the teams. Just on Benetton, obviously beating Edinburgh at the weekend, but Callum McRae, Kitty, so another product of the Borders, no Gal Academy this time, unfortunately. He was in Earlston High School, smelly boy, but Melrose Rugby Club will be delighted getting to be head coach of Benetton. I'm delighted for him because that was a big move for him, and it's gone really well. I know he's happy, and to become head coach, talking about DL, good news for Scottish Rugby. I hope that's good news for Scottish Rugby. Selfishly, it's great for Kitty, but for Scottish Rugby, I hope it's another sign. Greg Laidlaw, Clark Laidlaw, Callum McRae, John Dalziel, all of a sudden, there are others that you start to think, right, we're getting people out there getting experience in other places that they can come back and say, right, now it's time.
Totally. Couldn't have summed that up any better. I think it's a great thing for Callum. I think it's clearly he's had a good impact on Benetton. He seems to, when I spoke to him before Edinburgh went there last year, he was clearly loving it. I think you'll be able to tell me, but he played in Italy as well, didn't he?
Kitty, not sure about that.
Yeah. Anyway, but
do you know what I think is worth talking about? Both him and DL, we no longer have a Scotland Sevens.
I knew we were going to go there.
A lot of the development that I think Kitty and JD would point to would be the experiences that they had and gained through their Sevens exposure.
100%. It just shows Sevens isn't just a pathway. If you talk about somebody like Clark Laidlaw, Sevens isn't just a pathway for players. It's a pathway to actually make really good coaches.
But we also don't have. It was one of 3. Well, Scotland job as well. There was only 4 head coach jobs that Scottish Rugby could give people. Now we've got 3. So it was I know it's a different thing, but the skills of being a head coach in the Sevens must be relatable to what you're doing, because John Dalziel's proven it. Clark, Mike Friday's there, Simon Amos, that there's a whole load of people have been able to do it and leading a program. I had an assistant coach who'd worked with Scottish Rugby for a long time, and he needed to come into Clubland because he was only working on age group programs that were a short period of time, and he wanted to have something that was a whole season long and start and finish and the bits in between. And it breaks my heart because it's Hong Kong Sevens week. So that's why I'm feeling sad.
But basically. You're 100%. Look, the point is entirely valid. Sevens is clearly a big miss. It's a big miss because there's a load of players, the Freddie Douglases of the world, who could be out playing proper. Not saying Freddie Douglas isn't playing proper rugby, what he's doing, but there's a whole group of players who could be getting exposure to top level international rugby and all the demands of that, and similarly coaches that you think, well, it's clearly an opportunity we're missing. It is sad, I think, no matter how much people talk about it on forums like this, I don't think it's going to change in the short to medium term. But
it's never coming back, because we're never going to be in a position where there's the money and resource to do it.
Yeah, but it shows the missed opportunity, doesn't it?
Yeah, and by the way, you're right, he did play in Italy.
Yeah, I was almost sure I hadn't made that up because, I mean, so I think he enjoyed it when he was a player, Kitty, and I think he's really taken to it now, and his family seem to have taken to it. So, I mean, good luck to him as head coach.
Good lad. And we've not mentioned it, so let's talk now. Scotland women, great result. Decent performance. So a couple of players getting their debut. So I think lots to be positive about. It's now a tough shift when you've got to go away to France, but great win at the Hive.
Yeah, really good to start with a win. I think, whether it's 20s, men, women, Six Nations is so important in terms of momentum, and trying to prepare for France away, which is a tough old ask, is going to be difficult at the best of times. I think, given the fact that the players go into that with a win, will give them a bit of a spring in their step. And look, after the game, both Brian Easton and Rachel Malcolm were pretty honest in that they weren't that pleased with the way the performance. They were pleased with the win, but they weren't kind of too getting carried away with the performance. I think that's important because it wasn't perfect. It got pretty close. They obviously had to deal with Evie Gallagher's red card. We're
not even going to talk about that because it's such a can of worms. But the thing, your point is absolutely bang on. That first game, the Six Nations is an annual tournament that you get no preparation for.
Yeah.
If it's a World Cup, you have 2 World Cup warm-up games in the summer before you go, and you get 6 weeks of training, and you get all. The Six Nations comes around, it's like, right, bang, first game. The Welsh coach had 6 days with him.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing to say is that, it's, quite often a men's Six Nations players will go straight in, having played probably the week before for their clubs.
Yeah, and
probably for some of the Scots, that was like a Holly Cunningham who made her debut, who I actually thought was terrific.
Yeah, very good.
A lot of the Scottish players hadn't played for 3 or 4 weeks at all. Yeah. Never mind trying to play a test match. So it probably that gives them an idea that they need, of the level they need to step up. I think they've obviously got a trip to La Rochelle. They leave early tomorrow morning, so. That's going to be a tough place to go. Last time they were there, they lost 55-0 in France 2 years ago. And they were right in that was the end of their 12-game losing run. This team's come a long way in a relatively short space of time since then. But the challenge is, can they now go and show that they've actually tangibly bridged that gap in any way? I don't think, being realistic, I don't think Scotland will go to La Rochelle and win. It'd be amazing if they did, but I think if they can show signs of progress, then that's enough to say, right, against teams who are years ahead of us in terms of professionalism and all that stuff, and then they come back, and I think it's Italy at the Hive after the fallow week. Those home games are going to be the games that they target to get their wins.
We've got to score some tries. If you were French, you'd organise the games in the worst place to get to. Let's make them get 2 flights, 4 buses, and a train. Taking them to La Rochelle. But how good to see Emma Orbach Like talking about needing a run in, like Emma Orr comes back and just goes, it's like I've never been away. Like she was throwing sheep about and then bang, she's back in scoring tries and carving it up. Class.
Yeah, and yeah, she was brilliant. I thought the whole midfield, her, Lisa Thompson, Helen Nelson were all really good.
I think we've now got the 10, 12, 13 to be happy and consistent about in selection, which is tough on Merrill. But 10, 12, 13 seemed to work. Sorry, 10, 12, 13, yeah.
Yeah, but I think what Merrill gives you is something completely different in any of those positions.
Because Merrill's class, and I worry that flexibility is actually going to make it more difficult for her to start.
Yeah, it is. I think it undoubtedly is, and especially in the sort of age of, if you look at the bench last week and it was 6-2, Merrill's perfect, 10, 12, 13, 15. She's a ready-made sub, and she's a bit of a game changer. So, it is tough to see how she breaks into that team without somebody getting injured or moving aside. But look, I think that backline's pretty settled. I thought Bremner Holden at 9 was good. She adds a bit of spark.
I thought Katie Manson did well when she came on, though. Different player, different conditions, and it's nice having that difference to play with.
And that balance, rather than making a change for change's sake, I thought Jade added impact when she came on.
Yeah, I think she's probably frustrated that that's the part she's playing now, but she played it well.
She did, and I also think there is, I would expect that Jade would likely come in to start in absence of Evie Gallagher, but
yeah, I think against France you got to go physical, haven't you?
But when you look at, there are options. Jade could start a game and Evie could play 7 if you wanted to have the 2 open sides on the bench, or there is genuine options. Now I thought Holly Cunningham was really good next to Bonner in the second row. I thought, to be fair, for somebody who's never been in that environment until this Six Nations, Adele Ferry didn't look out of place at all when she came on, won her lineouts.
And that's a sizable jump for her.
It's a huge, I was chatting to Brian Easton about this last week before, once he'd picked the team. It's a huge jump to go from playing for Corstorphine and playing for Edinburgh to all of a sudden you're balancing work with going into Scotland camp with full-time professionals. It's a massive jump. And I must admit, I was slightly surprised when she was on the bench, because I thought it's a big old leap for the first game of a Six Nations, particularly when you've got somebody in the squad, in the starting team, who's making their debut. And I wondered, and I asked Brian about this, I wondered if they might go safe and put somebody like an Eva Donaldson, who's not officially in the squad, but she's kind of there as a day. I wondered if they would go safe and have a bit more experience, but Brian's totally backed Adele and backed Holly, and they've done well.
The women, and bear with me on this one, and I don't want this to upset people, but it's a bit more like the 20s in that you've got players who are full-time professionals playing week in, week out at a high level, and then you've got some boys in the 20s who are club players. And that's actually what Adele has come from, is an amateur setup to play, but she's playing alongside people whose job it is to play rugby. So it's not an equivalent of we're bringing in Marshall Sykes, because Marshall Sykes, a professional rugby player who's playing at the URC top level week in, week out. So for her to come in and like you say, I thought she did well, and it's tough because it's 14 against 14, so it's and coaches can talk about we plan for these things. Yeah, okay, but she hasn't. You can date in training. You can go, right, we're now down to 14. So what do we do in the scrum and the line out? But as a player, you've not done that before.
Yeah,
certainly at that level, and at a point in a game where actually this could go either way here.
But what I thought was interesting, Sarah Bonner runs the line out. And 3 times she chose, right, we're going to chuck this to Adele. And she won all 3, but they were like absolutely double tops at the top of her jump.
Yeah.
And that trust, to have that trust, I think is one of the big.
And I know, and I totally agree with you. But this is the kind, when I was a coach, and you'd the hooker, the sub hooker would go on, and the line out caller throws the first one to the tail, and you're like, just come on, like, come on. But so it's one of those things that if she misses that first one, the whole thing could have gone. But you take that first one, next one goes, and those, like, you're right. Having somebody like Sarah Bonnet, who's a class act, and the way she has taken on leadership, the way she conducts herself, and our best mate is in and around the squad, but isn't he next to her and all that kind of stuff. So to have her calling for you to jump is just brilliant. Like, it's such a great thing, that environment, that group, you just got to enjoy, and and when they get off the bus. Somebody was talking to me about this last week, and I'm not saying it out loud, but the players didn't have their headphones on when they get off the bus. They're soaking it up, they're engaging, they can smile. When they sing the anthem, everybody sings the anthem with pride, right? The men do as well, but the women can smile. They're allowed to smile. They're like, this is really good. I'm really enjoying this.
And I think the big difference, if you look back 2 years, there wasn't a lot to smile about. It was pretty tough times, and it had been hard going on and off the pitch. And I think they dealt with that admirably. Rachel Malcolm and Rob Robertson's column this week's all about how great, you'd written something similar before, but like how great Rachel is, and how well she deals with stuff both on the pitch but also off it, and shoulders that responsibility. And I think now you can see that as that 15 or that 23, they have come out the other side of those bad results. They might, slip up in a few games, but they've put that terrible run behind them, and now they do have a chance to put the shirt on and actually enjoy that environment. And it's almost that pressure's a privilege, to be in that position is a privilege for them, and they are determined to make the most of it and be the best Scotland women team that they can be. And I think, to be fair, over the last 12, 18 months, barring probably 1 or 2 games, they've done that.
But, Alex Stewart had her breakout as, club player, internet. Wow, look at that. Where did she come from? Hopefully Adele Ferry has this goal. I thought Burnley's selection was interesting, with Anne Young and Ellie Clark starting, and Leah Bartlett and CB coming off the bench. Probably more of a sign of it's now not just the first 15 that you pick. It's, we have to play for 80 minutes. But he never had that depth or trust before. A lot of the forwards had to play 80 minutes, and the replacements only went on if there was an injury. So the depth that's been built is massively helping. And having Evie Wills back, I mean, she's had, what a time she's had. And, talk about smiling, Evie Wills, what a smile.
But again, has played pretty much every week for Leicester. I know they've had their struggles, but in circumstances played into it, she didn't get on at the weekend. So, there's somebody else who's got, not that she would need it to play for Scotland after her time out, but there's more motivation. So there's all these wee things. You're right, the depth. Like, you look at some of the players now who are not in the 23, not in the 30. Think of Eva Donaldson, Louise McMillan, and think, well, actually...
Jenny Maxwell.
Maxwell. There's now some good players missing out, some experience missing out. And you're right that that's not a position that any Scotland coach has been in before. And even probably in the midst of that run 2 years ago, Brian was asking players to play. You're right. CB probably played 70 minutes of most games. And now she's on the bench, and who knows what will happen. But, it's interesting.
It's class. I had a shocker in my fantasy league team this week, I have to admit. Just awful. But anyway, we'll keep going.
Not good. Not good.
And
start.
You know, two of my favourite things came together today.
Now, I think I might have seen this, but please enlighten me.
So, Scotland women and Sabre the Gladiator.
Right, that is, yeah. I did think that's where you were going, but I wasn't sticking my neck on the line with that.
I tell you what, never have I enjoyed social media more. Gladiators is magnificent, and Sabre, being the Scottish Gladiator, is obviously my favourite. She's in Dundee. She came down. She was working with the Scotland squad today. Brilliant.
She's presenting the match ball at the Italy game, which you'll now not be allowed to go to on account of the restraining order.
Correct. That one does make me hurt a little bit, but amazing. Oh, listen, mate, it feels like it's been a long time, and it has. But there's so much going on and so much to look forward to. Club season winding down. You know, a few things going on. Hoyk took a sore one. There's been loads of dancing around that, but there's loads happening, and there's still so much to look forward to. Melrose Sibbons draws out, which I saw was an interesting one. Heaps happening. So you'll be busy this weekend.
I am busy this weekend. I'm in the sort of unusual position of actually having a 3-game weekend. So I'm doing Edinburgh on Friday night, I'm doing Glasgow on Saturday night, and I'm doing the Scotland women game on Saturday afternoon. So it is going to be, pretty full on, but look, it's good. We're busy. There's loads happening. There's loads of stuff on the site, and it's only £1 to subscribe, as I'm sure you were just about to say.
That's what you get paid the big bucks for, my man. 3-game weekends. That's the rock star wages kicking in there.
I wish.
You're bang on. It's £1 to subscribe. Get involved. There's heaps on there. URC, Scotland Women, British Lions. It's all there, and it's there for you to enjoy. And it's brought to you by S1 Jobs, the Scotland Rugby News podcast sponsor. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to S1 Jobs and upload your CV now. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. Big fella, see you at the Hive on Friday. We've got a great weekend coming. Look after yourself, everyone.